Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sound for International Day of People with Disability discussion panel. Today we have Maxine Parker, Rebecca Allnutt, and Dale, sorry, Dale, what's your last name? I missed it earlier today.
Henry.
Dale Henry joining us. And we're very excited to be here because today we're going to talk about, yes, discrimination, but also about ways in which we can move forward to build a more inclusive world for people living with hearing conditions. So today as well, Sound for is launching its submission to the Royal Commission on Disability, where we collected lived experience stories from people living with hearing conditions and how discrimination often tends not to be overt, but actually be systemic in ways that we're not even aware of. So I'm very excited to be here with you today, guys. And I guess I'd love to start with some basic introductions. If you could maybe tell us a bit more about your story, yourselves, and specifically what your experience has been in the hearing sector, and why are you passionate about building a world for hearing equality? So maybe I'll start with you, Rebecca, if you can start.
Yeah, okay. So I'm Rebecca Allnutt. I'm an Indigenous audiologist from Tasmania, but I've been living in Alice Springs now for 20 odd years. For me, I've always felt like there's been some kind of not overt discrimination, but certainly a very poor understanding of hearing loss and the effects that it has on people who have a hearing impairment. I became an audiologist because my grandfather was quite hearing impaired, and growing up with him, finding all of the issues and that he had just in society in general, I suppose. So it's always been on the back of my mind about how we can try and make society in general more inclusive of people with hearing loss or hearing conditions. And for me, especially as an Indigenous audiologist, we know that there's a lot of hearing impairment with Indigenous people. And so that's a bit of a passion for mine as well. So yeah, but I'm very, very pleased and honoured to be on this panel today.
Thank you, Rebecca. Dale?
My name's Dale Henry. I've lived in Alice Springs for 29 years. I was actually born deaf with the rubella, German measles in both ears. It's been a bit of a challenge throughout my life as a deaf person to try and fit into it too. A normal society kind of lifestyle. And I've experienced a few things over the years since I was probably in primary school, right through to maybe not so recent. Yeah, it's good to be on this panel today to share my experiences. So thank you for that.
Thank you for joining us, Dale. And Maxine?
You're welcome.
So hi everybody, yes, I'm Maxine, and I am one of the co-founders and co-directors of Accessibility Australia, and we're based in Victoria. So needless to say, the nature of our work actually takes me into the space of ensuring equality and inclusion and accessibility for people with disability. As well as people of all abilities, because at the end of the day, we all like to have a sense of control over our choices. I personally live with my own hearing loss, so I have single-sided deafness, which I acquired back in, I guess, the end of 2016, early 2017, where I was diagnosed with an acoustic neuroma and had surgery to remove that. So I went from what I thought was some mild hearing loss to significant, complete 100% hearing loss in one ear. So that was a very difficult journey for me. And had I tapped into the wonderful services of Sound Fair way back then, I'm sure I wouldn't have experienced half the journey that I did have to endure. So, you know, hearing equality from a personal perspective for me is very much about being supported physically, socially, and emotionally. And that has come to light so much more with the wonderful that I've been doing Sound Fair as well as an advocate and a sound fair pioneer. So I'm for hearing loss and to be a part of this panel. So thank you for joining us and for listening, and thank you for this.
Thank you so much, Maxine. I guess like the next question would be for both you, Maxine, and Dale. Because you both have gone through very personal and different journeys in terms of your hearing conditions. So I'm interested in knowing, because I think that's one of the things that society may not necessarily be aware of. What were the main challenges that you encountered in this journey? And how did you navigate them? What actually helped? Or what maybe would have helped that you didn't have?
The hearing aid technology back in 1975 was it's not as good as it is today. So I mean, you can't go back and change that. But today's technology it helps a lot more with using phones and things like that. Always had problems using the phone. Back then, you know, before mobile phones came out, there was no Bluetooth or anything like that. That was a challenge using phones. And also, hearing the teachers in school was quite a challenge as well. Most of my schooling life, I was actually put in front of the class. And the only problem with that was that all the other students in the class would be talking, creating background noise. And the way I would deal with that was that I actually had, what do you call that?
Like an FM system?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a radio FM system, which the teacher had a speaker, microphone on the shirt, and I carried the receiver. And that would be used to help me in class to hear better. And it wasn't always that helpful at times. And there's the issues with going for sporting events, like with swimming. You know, take the hearing aids out, and I can't hear anything without them. There was a bit of an issue going swimming in school. So I don't do much swimming today, but back then, yeah, it was a bit of a challenge falling in the swimming pool with the hearing aids on. Did that one. Never again. Yeah. And issues like being in a social setting where you've got more than one person talking. You can't always hear one person. You hear all of them at the same time, sort of thing. It was quite difficult to deal with that, especially in places like say if you go to a cafe or something where there's coffee machines in the background. You need to find somewhere nice and quiet so that you can hear your friends and things like that. It was quite difficult for me in noisy environments. Workplaces are even worse, where there's noise. As an example, I spent 2 years working at Coles supermarket, collecting trolleys and cleaning inside the store. And there was a lot of noise in the background, all the registers beeping and things like that. And all the hearing aids just picked up all that background noise. And it was a difficult situation to try and deal with that because you can't actually reduce the noise that comes from those machines. It made it very difficult under those circumstances. But I found a way to deal with it was to, if someone wanted to talk to me, was to ask them to go to a quiet place.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
No, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the main things that came out in the submission as well, in terms of how places in the way they're built or designed are not necessarily accessible for the best communication. So even open space offices, for example, like where everybody's working in one same room, or where you have these walls dividing desks and you can't see the other person talking to you, how that's really detrimental and exclusive of people with hearing conditions. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, Maxine?
Yeah, look, absolutely, and completely echo all of your thoughts there, because with my hearing loss, it was almost like, you know, a switch being flicked. So I went from having minimal hearing loss to suddenly having 100% significant hearing loss in one ear. And although I had experienced minimal hearing loss for some time prior to surgery in that ear, I didn't realize the significant impact actually going from,
Maxine, I think you're breaking up a
you
little.
know, possibly tend to sink into my, I was absolutely shocked and astounded by the significant difference that it did make. And I did find myself socially withdrawing for quite some time, and that isn't my character at all. I am quite an outgoing social person normally, but I found myself shying away from social opportunities. And if, for example, if I were invited to go somewhere, whether it be a dinner or a night out or something like that, there seemed to be an awful lot of extra planning for me and strategizing that had to then go into that event. And the anxiety around going would build and build and build prior to even attending, with all of the thoughts going through my head and all the what ifs I can't hear, and what if I can't do this, and what if I look like a fool because I'm not answering questions that are being asked of me, and how embarrassing is that going to be? So all of that anxiety would take away the actual pleasure. I had to learn, I guess, to self-educate, teach myself strategies, because as I mentioned back then, I didn't know where to go for help. There wasn't anything staring me in the face. I wasn't channeled through the system in terms of, you know, speak to this person, speak to this particular type of coach, speak to this particular type of audiologist or therapist or health professional. I wasn't given any of that information. So for me, it was all around self-advocacy and self-empowerment. And that took a long time. I have to say it took probably a lot longer than I think it should have taken had I been given the professional help from the beginning. So yes, I definitely shied away. I definitely socially isolated. And, you know, it even became an issue with relationships because, for example, my husband would want to go do things and instantly I would just knock on the head and say, no, not doing it. So it would impact relationships as well.
Yeah, I think you highlight something very important, Maxine, in the sense of...
and that was exhausting. And like I said, took all the pleasure away. But, you know, I have now, I guess a lot of it is the journey of coming to terms and acceptance as well of the new norm. So, you know, I have arrived at that point and I have built up a whole bank of, I've got a massive toolkit now, a bank of, you know, strategies up my sleeve that I can always work with. But it's never perfect.
Yeah. And I think you raise a very important point in the sense of, and what Sound Fair often like continuously says, it's hearing conditions. If we don't have an inclusive society, the impacts are not just physiological. The impacts are emotional, they're psychological, they're social. And we need to take this into account when designing strategies to support people to navigate it. And not only that, I think that the big problem of what you're mentioning is the fact that you had to learn how to self-advocate kind of puts the onus on the person experiencing the hearing condition instead of diluting that responsibility within the whole of society to make sure that no one's left behind, which is more like what should be the case. Rebecca, you have a very different experience in this sense because you come from an audiologist perspective. And you and I talked about a couple of weeks ago, and you shared a beautiful story with me in terms of how you as a health practitioner can actually support people that are in a position of disadvantage and build a more inclusive society. I was wondering if you could talk to us more about your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I just admire Maxine and Dale so much, and anyone with a hearing condition. And you know, certainly as an audiologist, I think we focus so much on the technical side of things and the identification of a hearing loss, and this is what it could mean, and, you know, certainly handing out a little piece of paper to the clients going, oh, here's some strategies, go and see how it goes, or to families, you know, this could be the expectation, and certainly I'm a very big, strong advocate of, even for a university, as starting off as an audiologist or as an audiology student, your first job should be being an advocate for your client, number one priority. So yeah, just the story that I shared with you was about a lady that was out at the jail. This is a number of years ago, and a judge had asked for me to do a hearing assessment, or for a hearing assessment to be conducted, because he wasn't quite sure if she was actually understanding what was going on. So I did a hearing assessment, and it turned out this Indigenous lady was actually profoundly deaf. And so she had no language, but she did have some signing. So we got an interpreter to come out to the prison, and this woman was just so overwhelmed that she could actually do some signing with the interpreter. When I was talking to some of the prison guards out there, their responses were, no, she's just putting it on. She can hear. She seems to follow, you know, she goes to the dining room with the others, you know, all of those, and me trying to explain to them, well, actually, she's just following the other people, and she's obviously, people know that she has a hearing impairment or is profoundly deaf, so they're, you know, gesturing and touching and all those kind of things. So when the results were explained to the judge, the case was actually thrown out, and she was able to go back to community. It was a very, very minor charge. But it really affected me in the sense that this woman had no advocate. There was no assumption. There was all these assumptions, sorry, that this woman was, you know, just not playing the game right, or so yeah, it was a really big changing point for me, to say, okay, well, there needs to be something happening for these people that are going into this system, that they need to have an opportunity to be able to understand and hear. I mean, the Indigenous people out here as well, that English is often their third or fourth language. So they're behind the eight ball with that, in a courtroom, and then to have a hearing impairment. So yeah, it was a big thing for me. And I mean, I've been very fortunate to know Dale for 20 years. So I've actually been able to learn a lot from Dale as well about his, I guess, journey and his experiences, and I've learned a lot from that when I talk to clients as well. So yeah, it's about trying to put those strategies in place, but make society more inclusive as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Maxine.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that. I think, you know, what people obviously don't realise is the layers of complexity to hearing loss and the impacts of that. And what you were saying, Beck, you know, obviously a lot of people don't have the awareness, don't have the understanding. And like Dale was saying, if you walk into a noisy cafe or there's background noise, everything's picked up by technology, by those hearing aids. And so it's very difficult to filter. So I know for me, if adjustment happened in my actual brain to handle the sensory inputs and things like that, but it's exhausting, absolutely exhausting. By the end of the day, my head is in an absolute spin, and the tinnitus is heightened. And I think a lot of people who are working in service roles, whether it be frontline staff in organisations, whether it be service staff, like you were saying, the prison guards, there needs to be a higher level of training in terms of effective communication, because those layers of complexity can be peeled back. Environments can be altered to suit. And the altering of those environments, they're not just going to suit a person with hearing loss, they're going to suit a very, very wide range of people. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and go ahead, Dale.
I had a situation where I was pulled over by the police one day, and they tried to claim I had an oil leak. And a good friend of mine who was a mechanic told me that it wasn't. But the way the police officer spoke to me, and he turned around and said, "Are you deaf?" in a real crappy kind of voice. And I just gave him that dirty look. And that's the sort of thing we have to deal with as well. When we have to deal with people that have never dealt with someone with a hearing loss or deafness in their life, don't know how to communicate with deaf people. That makes it very hard. And as Maxine said there, she's got that anxiety there. You know, you're worried about whether the question that someone has you've been asked. I'm actually getting a bit.
You're doing great.
Yeah, sorry, getting a bit carried away here. When somebody asks a question, whether you've understood it properly, it's not just about hearing what someone said. It's about being able to understand what has been said to you. And that can be the difference between giving the right answer or the wrong one. And sometimes you might give them the wrong answer and it could be an embarrassing situation for a deaf person like me and like Maxine. You know, you might not answer the question correctly. And it's like, oh my God, you know. So I can understand that, where she's coming from with the anxiety. And that what Rebecca said about the prison guard saying, oh, she's playing with it, you know, she's putting it on. Yeah, that's not very nice at all. I haven't actually dealt with that, but I've seen other people having to put up with it.
Absolutely. And I think like the tenet of all that you're saying is basically there needs to be more education, because if you, like, it's already anxiety provoking to deal with this uncertainty that you're experiencing. And then if you get negative feedback from the person you're trying to communicate with that comes across as judgmental, like a judgmental attitude or a dismissive attitude, or even mocking and bullying, that doesn't make it any easier. That just kind of reiterates the fact that, yes, I need to be anxious, because if I understand wrong, something bad would happen. So I think as a society, we need to figure out strategies of how to educate people and institutions to understand that this is not okay, and that these attitudes are actually quite hurtful and exclusivist. And how do we actually build an environment that's leading to good communication? And as Maxine was saying, like, if you build a space that is accessible, that's not only going to benefit people with hearing conditions, that's going to benefit everybody, because it's still it's accessible to everybody, and people will hear better. So why wouldn't we? So I guess in that way, what are some of the strategies that you think that you have put in place, like yourselves, in terms of, because I think both you, Rebecca, and Maxine have done a lot of advocacy work in that sense, even with your own work as to like how you go about your daily lives to make sure that hearing equality is a reality. So I would love to hear more about what you're doing personally to build a more inclusive world, and also what needs to happen more broadly. What do we need to change to build a more inclusive society, and how do we go about it? And this is a huge question, I'm aware of it. I don't expect us to know the answers and solve the world today. But I feel it's always good for us to start at least brainstorming and putting it out there, because then when we come together and everybody has different skills, and we can start making this a reality.
I think this sign language is something that a lot of deaf people do, and it's very difficult for someone. I don't use sign language personally, but I have in the past with other deaf students at high school. I think it would be a good idea for sign language to be included in school education to help for the it'll help people that deal with people who do sign language, will make it easier for them. That'd be a good place to start as well. Technology is another one that can be used as well, like with the dealing with, like with Rebecca said about this lady at the prison who was having trouble communicating. She couldn't speak, but she did sign language. And if she had had a prison officer there that was educated in sign language, it may have made things a lot easier for her and with her experiences. And then other people would see that she's doing sign language, and then they can see that she's deaf. It would make it easier for them to understand the situation that she's in. And I think it's more about education, educating people what it's like. It's not just about going to the audiologist and having a hearing test. It's about having the right hearing aid to use, having people around you that can support you, that understand that this is what you have to deal with every day. You know, there's a lot of things that we can think about that'll help people that are deaf and hearing, hard of hearing. It'll take time, yes, but sign language is one of those things that will be a starting point. I think, you know, and technology.
Technology, yeah. I think technology is a big one. And I think also for me is providing parents, for example, who have a newborn child that's born hearing impaired. In some of the larger clinics, you know, they have the availability of a counsellor or a psychologist who is able to provide that support. You know, I've got a psychology background, but I'm not trained in doing that kind of very specialised counselling. And I think it's a real need to provide that support and to help that family go through the journey. So that's something that I think I would like to see happen. And even just having, I mean, we're a very small town here in Alice Springs, but we do have a disability advocacy centre, but I don't know how much information or knowledge they have about hearing loss or hearing conditions. I think it's more focused on those very other significant physical disabilities. So I guess, you know, there's very little here in town. And Maxine, you said it perfectly, you know, the journey that you had to have without having that support, it should have been a lot easier for you to navigate what happened to you and the world that suddenly became so different. You know, and that's what I would like to see is it doesn't matter if you're a town of, you know, 500 people or a big city, you know, with this technology, with online training and online stuff these days, there should be that ability or that organisation that someone can now go to. And I mean, I'm a huge advocate of sound fair, and I think it's great. And certainly if I have clients that, you know, need to talk to someone or have some kind of advocacy, I always recommend sound fair because I just don't think we have anything at the moment in town to do that. No. So that to me, I think needs to happen. And I guess also, I've got she's not a young girl now, she's 19, who has had a progressive loss, and she was very fortunate in that she had her family were very, very strong advocates for her. So she's grown up a very strong young lady. But again, making that individual with the hearing loss have the strength and strategies from that very young age to be their own advocate, but also know who they can go to be their advocate, and it may not be family.
Yeah. And then I, again, completely echo both of your thoughts, Rebecca and Dale, because the idea of Auslan being more prevalent and being taught from a younger age, I think is really critical in terms of forming a foundation of understanding and awareness and assistance. Sort of putting my educator's hat on now, I worked for many years in an educational setting, working with students with disability. And it really is my belief that students from a young age should be taught to build their capacity to critique societal constructs and forms of discrimination. I don't know if you're aware, but the Australian curriculum actually supports students to develop personal and social capability so that they actually can learn to understand themselves and others. And within that realm of education, you know, it talks about developing empathy for others and establishing positive relationships. And, you know, if you don't have an understanding of a person and their needs, it's very difficult to even begin to establish those positive relationships. You know, it also focuses on preparing students for potential potential life roles, as, you know, family members and community, being a part of community and workforce members. So again, you know, that filters on through the rest of their life as well, if they've got that foundational understanding and learning. And, you know, what's interesting is in the years that I actually worked in education and in the classroom, I really very, very rarely saw an explicit lesson taught about disability. And I really rarely ever saw it discussed with children. And I know a lot of that may be around, you know, privacy rights and parents not necessarily wanting to disclose their child's disability. But it almost seems, because of those sorts of restrictions, that it almost becomes a taboo topic for children to actually talk about. And, you know, children will obviously observe a student whose behaviours are somewhat different. Like Dale was saying, he would always be at the front of the classroom. So other students in the classroom are going to be observing that. And I just think that would be a great opportunity to start those conversations around understanding and awareness. So many young children have elderly relatives, elderly grandparents. Like you were saying, Beck, I think you said it was your grandfather who had hearing loss. So, you know, if you're taught from a very young age and how to communicate and how to assist these people, it's going to build much more positive relationships. And I think, you know, children from a very young age, they're fascinated with differences, and then they're naturally curious and they want to learn about their world around them and their surrounds. They're impressionable, and they're also very accepting of differences and diversity. And I think their viewpoints on disability should be scaffolded by teachers, you know, as opposed to being influenced by external sources, you know, media and things like that. I mean, I'm very passionate about education. I've worked in the educational sector for many years. I'm a mum of two young adults now who are both professionals themselves, one actually in the educational field and one's an occupational therapist. So it's interesting that they both followed suit and gone into, you know, similar roles in terms of caring and assisting and supporting others. And I'm very proud of them for that. But, you know, I think that it's a really valuable lessons, I think, for children to have teachings around disability in the classroom. And I think it's very much a foundation for learning and good citizenship as well. And I think that's probably a really good starting point in terms of moving forward and how we can assist, you know, more people to have a better understanding if we can start at that foundational level with children and education.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Maxine. Rebecca, from the health sector perspective, what do you think needs to change for us to take a more holistic approach towards hearing health?
Well, you know, I mean, I would love to see more audiologists who are actually hearing impaired be to go through the audiology. I mean, I've got a couple of friends who are both hearing impaired and who are amazing audiologists, and I think they bring their story to the table, and they can empathise so much more as well. But also, you know, I guess employing, just in general, employing more people with hearing impairment. I mean, the organisation that I work for, they're very, very inclusive of employing people with a disability, which is which is great. But then they still need to make sure that, you know, strategies and things are put into place to support that person. Yeah, I think it's about, again, it just all comes down to education. I think that's just probably the biggest thing, is educating people. It doesn't matter what area of the workforce, whether you're, you know, a cleaner, or whether you're a CEO or a coup of the organisation you're at, everyone needs to be educated.
Absolutely. And I think you both raised fairly important points, in the sense that you're very right, Maxine. Like, if we really invest into educating people from the get-go, from an early age, then we're really investing in our future, because that's like, it takes years of untraining and unlearning, I think, once you're an adult, to really rewire and think about the world in a different way. Well, if we start from an early age, I feel there's so much things that we can prevent from happening in the future, from simple things like when kids are in the classroom and they notice that there's something different, and maybe react to that with snickering comments or things like that, just because it's different and they don't know what to do about it. If you have the education from the get-go, then you prevent that from happening. And that can help so much in long-term anxieties for everyone involved.
Yeah.
And then when these kids grow up, they will make sure to design spaces that are inclusive as well. So that kind of takes care of everything in the long run. But I feel at this point in time, we really need to come together between all sectors to do things conjointly. So we need education, yes, in schools, but also in the healthcare system, and also in the workplace, because we can't wait 50 years to make the world more inclusive. We want to start doing it now. So, but it all comes down to education. And I feel that what you raised, Rebecca, in terms of having more audiologists that are experiencing hearing loss, or hiring more people with hearing conditions, that's also very important, because we can't have people that are not familiar or do not know the needs that a person with hearing conditions have dictate the policies that are put in place, because that's just acting out of ignorance. So we really need people with hearing conditions to be the ones designing and saying what we need. And Dale, in that sense, what you raised about technology and Auslan, like, I think those are two very important things to think about. And also that highlights to me the importance of choice, in the sense of, like, I know that your hearing journey has been very different to Maxine's, and you both will have different needs, and you both will want different solutions will work better for you. So having the possibility to choose between different technologies and to choose between whether you want to sign or not, like just having a breadth of options available, I think also kind of, it highlights the fact that there's autonomy involved, and that it doesn't take that away. Because I feel like often if you're just like put into a system and you're just like, oh, this is what you do and you're on your own, it can feel very disempowering. So I think you highlighted that as well with your comments.
I think also, Lois, the breadth of opportunity is a fabulous idea. But I guess as the individual with the hearing loss, we would love to have a central bank, you know, somewhere where we can go to access that breadth of opportunity and ideas and strategies, tools and resources, because otherwise, you know, we're really swimming upstream, and it's a really, really hard journey. And, you know, sometimes we can be going in 25 different directions and getting conflicting information and advice as well. So, you know, if there was somewhere where there was a centralized bank, that would be fantastic.
Beautiful. That's really, really important. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any other comments or ideas that you'd like to raise in this regard. I think we're nearing the end of our panel. So anything else that you feel is important to say around how to build a more inclusive world for people with hearing conditions?
There is one little thing I would love to see happen, and I have a young daughter, and you know, many times, you know, her and I have been out shopping, and we've gone into these, you know, young funky dress shops and things like that, and it's like stepping foot into a nightclub. So for me, it's an absolute logistical nightmare. So I think it would be wonderful if there was some regulation around healthy hearing. I'm not sure if I'm using the right technology, the right wording here. Healthy hearing decibels for public spaces. I think that would be absolutely wonderful. Even your cafes and your restaurants with music pumping in the background. And I know it's designed to create an atmosphere. But I think if you probably ask the majority of people in there, they'd far rather that music be turned down so they can enjoy the company that they're with. So I think if there was some regulation around what is a healthy hearing environment, that would be most helpful as well. Not just for people with hearing loss, but also to help prevent further hearing loss.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Noisy environments can be a real challenge for deaf and hard of hearing people, that's for sure.
Yeah.
You know, you'd be talking to someone and you miss half of the conversation, especially if in a group. It makes it quite difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think even though, like, you know, I find it very distracting even, you know, if I was out for dinner with some friends a few weeks ago, and we actually went up and turned this music down ourselves because it was so loud that we couldn't actually hear each other across the table. So I think that's a really good point, Maxine. And you know, not even from a you know, a point of view of trying to prevent hearing loss, because we know that, well, when I see some of the young ones come in and try and do a bit of health education with them about noise-induced hearing loss, and you know, I say to them, you're just going to make me a very rich woman one day, because you're going to have to all have hearing aids and you're all going to have to pay for them, and you know, good luck with that. But you know, they do have that sense of you know, oh, it won't happen to me. But I totally agree, and I know the National Acoustics Laboratory have done some amazing stuff. But again, it's about getting it out there into the world.
Yeah. I think it would be really helpful though if it were more government regulated in terms of this is a healthy hearing environment, and we don't go above this level of decibel. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, pretty annoying when you go into a place and there's music in the background, you can't hear your mother saying something to you. It's like, what?
Yeah.
And all you hear is the music.
Yeah.
Like in shopping centres and places like that.
Yeah, and there's
noise, you've got noise all around you, yeah.
Yeah, like you say, there's the cash registers, there's overhead announcements, there's shopping trolleys, there's people's voices, and as a hearing impaired person, we can't filter. And our devices probably make it a little worse at times in those sorts of public noisy environments.
Yeah, no, just the thing that annoys me the most is when you have these people, they'll say something to you and then you say, sorry, I didn't hear you. Then they'll say, oh, don't worry about it. Yeah. That's the most annoying thing I've ever come across.
Yeah. I agree, Dale, totally. Yeah.
Just like getting a slap in the face sort of thing.
Yeah, you're not worth it. You're not worth talking to, so don't worry about it.
Yeah. It really gives you a feeling of inadequacy.
Yeah.
So once again, it boils down to education. I think that's the key word of today.
It would seem so, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. It was a lovely, lovely conversation, and I think very, very relevant. And yeah, at Soundfor, we'll keep definitely advocating for this. Up and coming, we're working on the Hear Me report, which we're highlighting the areas of work that we all need to do in order to make this a reality. So thank you for your time today, because every conversation really informs our way moving forward. And it's great to have you as part of the team. And yeah, we'll have not happy, but International Day of Disability. And have a wonderful day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Thank you.